This week, we have 3 segments for you on the show. The first will be an interview with Patrick Laverty from Rapid7, no stranger to the show or Security Weekly. Patrick used to work here. And he is currently working on, working at Rapid7 is one thing, but working on social engineering Rhode Island. That's not social engineering the entire state. It's actually creating a social engineering conference right here in Rhode Island. So we'll be talking about that with Patrick, among other things. Then, we'll do the security news. We'll talk about Pwn to Own, Windows and Flash vulnerabilities, Mem crashed, what John Oliver got wrong about Bitcoin, MikroTik router vulnerabilities, VMware vulnerabilities, and this is what happens when Bitcoin miners take over your town. Very interesting article. After that, there is a pre-recorded interview with Dick Wilkins from Phoenix Technologies to talk about the evolution from BIOS to what he refers to as platform firmware, or UEFI. Dick sits on the panel on the forum for UEFI, and it's a fascinating interview. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian. Excited to be here, as always, on Paul's Security Weekly.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I totally introduce our host right now, but I've been a totally awkward boner.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
Sounds like a plan.
And we'll at least have one person listening.
That's right. Just saying.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate it, and I'm glad you enjoyed your spooning with Jeff. But
hey, actually built a new office.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, third baby on the way, so I needed a new office.
Nice.
I lost my old office. That's now the baby room.
Brought to you by
NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. In 2017, an increasing number of companies reported they did not have effective insider threat detection methods. Logarithm's UEBA solutions enable you to detect and neutralize user-based threats in real time, while built-in scenario and behavior-based analytics empower you to expose insider threats, compromised accounts, and privilege misuse. Visit logarithm.com to learn how their UEBA solutions can help you expand visibility and enhance detection capabilities.
And welcome to the show, where not only apparently is 911 a joke in your town, Bitcoin miners take over your town. But first, let me introduce you to our host, a man who just shows up to see if he recognizes anybody here, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode 551. I am, of course, as Larry said, your host, Paul Asadorian, coming fresh off the heels of Secure World Expo in Boston, where we call it NetSparker. It was a great conference. You'll hear more probably throughout the show because, we just drove back from Boston. So, to my left in studio is none other than Mr. Larry Pesci. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Hi. Sorry, mouthful of rye.
Rye whiskey is what
Yes.
we're drinking. Yes,
Yes.
very, very good. Patrick Laverty is also here in studio. Patrick, welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly.
Thanks, Paul. This is a whole lot of fun to be down here.
Yes, we can't forget about our host on coming on via Skype. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be back again. Also drinking rye.
It's a rye whiskey kind of night.
It is.
Apparently.
It's a rye kind of night.
A couple of quick announcements. I'll go through the conferences as I stated, just coming off of Secure World Expo. We'll be posting those videos that we recorded in the booth over the day and a half that we were there. We will also then be traveling to InfoSec World next week, where there'll be shenanigans, so you should join us there. If you're not registered, you probably should do that really soon. The discount code is OS18-SW. I caught up with Rob Shane, who's running Source Conference. When is Source Conference happening? It's happening in May sometime. Do you know when Source Conference is happening, Patrick?
I can certainly look that up.
Sure. You have the Googles, or you could go to sourceconference.com. That event will be there as well. I will be speaking at InfoSec World and Source Boston. So make sure you check out our conferences. We have discount codes for all of our conferences that are normally on the wiki. So wiki.securityweekly.com.
Paul, that conference is May 9th and 10th.
May 9th and 10th. You should definitely go to Source Boston. So, Larry, you going to come to a conference with us in Boston? You go to conferences all over the world. There's ones
I know,
happen.
and the ones that are right in their own backyard, I hardly ever make it to.
Yeah.
I have to check the schedule, but I would like to and need to, and would definitely think it's a damn good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick Laverty, so with all of the conferences that we have, you decided to create a new conference. So let's start there and talk about how you came to create the Social Engineering Rhode Island Conference.
Yeah, I think that's probably a great place to start. We can probably back up even further to how we got to that point. I seem to remember hanging out with you a whole lot way back in 2013.
Yes, you were doing do we call it a fellowship?
Yeah, fellowship, internship, sure. Paul's do whatever kind of person, I think.
Yes. Took on multiple projects here and worked for Security Weekly.
Yeah, which also kind of came about just because I run a local OWASP chapter, and you came to speak.
Patrick does all things local Rhode Island stuff. We're thankful to have Patrick do that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, we certainly try to build any kind of community that we can around here and talk about all kinds of security stuff. And I remember
you do multiple. I'm sorry, you do multiple ones now. You do OWASP.
Yes.
You do DC 401 now.
Yeah,
You're the coordinator for that.
Yeah, DEF CON 401.
And do you do something else too, a regular meeting, or they're just those two?
Just those two.
Okay.
Yep.
And now there's a conference here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at one of those OWASP meetings where you came to speak, I think we started talking about wanting to put on a conference.
Oh, yeah. And then we ran a conference together.
We did.
Which was fun.
I think we ran one of the best B-Sides conferences ever.
People still give us great feedback about that. So.
To this day, I have people saying, when is B-Sides Rhode Island coming back?
We can't top the first one.
That's exactly the answer
Right?
we give.
You blew your wad on the first one, guys.
We did. We just unloaded Paul's Rolodex.
We did. Yeah, we had a fantastic lineup of speakers. It was pretty epic.
And that's exactly the problem that I tell people. I'm like, if we can't beat that, why even try again?
Right.
So we haven't.
We probably should, but
we can try that again someday because
that was fun.
There's lots of people out there that want to see it again. So maybe we'll do that kind of thing. So after that, since we figured, or at least I figured, we can't do anything better than that with B-Sides Rhode Island, I kind of got affiliated with B-Sides Boston a little bit and kind of helped them out for a few years. And the last few years I've been like the speaker coordinator for B-Sides Boston, putting that on. And B-Sides is one of the best conferences that I think there are. It's actually my favorite kind of conference that there is anywhere. Those are the ones that I like going to the most. But I decided that I wanted to do something else in Rhode Island again. And I didn't really want to do a B-Sides. I wanted to see if I could do my own thing after kind of working on the B-Sides for 13, 14, 15, 4 years, I guess. I don't know. Math's hard. And I remember one night sitting on Twitter and seeing people discuss, like, what are all the best conferences to go to? Which ones should I go to? Which ones should I see? And I remember suggesting to somebody, like, well, you should check out the B-Sides because I really like those. And, the other question that somebody came up was like, well, are there any social engineering conferences? I was like, I don't know. Since then, I've researched and seen that there's a couple, but I'm like, that would be an outstanding idea. A whole conference just focused on social engineering. So if we can get people in there that are all experts talking about their phishing, their vishing, their smishing, their pretext, their being able to bypass the front desk, I think that would be something that would be really interesting. And because I also often think that network security is, come a long way, that I think there's been a real great focus on network security for many years. And I think that a lot of the network engineers and network security people have a great understanding of security, and lots of products are up there. And I think the web was probably the next area where security started catching up. And that's another huge area of interest for me is in the area of web security. And I think there's a lot of great tools for those kinds of things. But I think really the next thing that people are going to be going after is going to be the people. I think the humans, the employees, the staff are still going to be the weakest link. So I think that's probably going to be an area that is a huge area of focus probably for the upcoming future. And that's probably an area where lots of companies and budgets and focus needs to be on the next few years is in the social engineering area and making sure that people aren't giving up the information, giving up the keys to the kingdom, passwords, these kinds of things, to keep people out of the company. So I guess that's kind of a really long-winded way of saying that I thought coming up with a somewhat unique conference in an area that was pretty specific and is going to be an area of concern going forward could be something interesting, and hopefully it works out pretty well.
And now, who do you have coming to speak at this conference?
Well, we have quite the lineup of speakers. We have this one talk that I'm pretty excited about that's called Social Engineering Your Way into an InfoSec Career.
Who's the jackass giving that talk?
What's that? Asador Paul.
Yeah, that's right. That's my talk.
He is an ass.
An
Dorian.
ass, a Dorian.
So what kind of things are you thinking that you might be talking about in that?
No idea.
It was a great title. And Paul's like,
I wrote a description.
Yeah.
Right. It was pretty good description too.
Right.
Right. And that's all you get so far.
okay.
I will give a presentation. It'll have slides and stuff. I don't know what's going to be on the slides.
Lots
just
of cat
yet.
pictures and puppy pictures.
It sounds more
Essentially.
like social engineering your way into speaking at a
Yes.
social engineering conference.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
There'll be probably just pictures on slides that I'll cycle through and say stuff about.
I'm sure that'll be awesome.
Little kung fu here.
Some kung fu thrown in.
Yeah.
There might be a sequel to that talk.
To the Kung Fu talk.
Yeah, there might be. There's a rumor that I heard recently.
Everything that you need to know about security you learn from karate?
They learn from a sequel, because people were like suggesting they talk about other things, and I'm like, no, like a sequel, it'd still be a kung fu movie, and we just have to come up with all new things that we draw from kung fu movies.
That could be
That's
interesting.
where I'm thinking of going.
Cool. So another talk that I'm super excited about at this conference was just kind of an idea that I had when I was first putting it together is going to be a panel. And this panel is going to have 4 winners from DEF CON Capture the Flag and DerbyCon Capture the Flag, the contest that human hacker Chris Hadnagy puts on. So maybe some people have seen out in Vegas and in DerbyCon, Chris has his glass booth inside of the social engineering village. And these people get put in there, I think it's for 20 minutes, where they have to try to capture as many flags, which the flags are using social engineering to kind of get information out of a target that they were given ahead of time and get to do some research. So the panel there is going to be these people and how they're going to talk about what are their ways, what were some of their methodology, what types of things that they really look at in order for that to work. So the people that we have there, Chris Kirsch, who won DEF CON 25, is going to be speaking. We got Jen Fox from DEF CON 23, won it. Joe Gray won the DerbyCon 6, Capture the Flag. And then we also have Whitney Maxwell. Whitney is...
Oh, wait, sorry, go back to Jen. I met Jen at a SANS event.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that was her. She's super nice.
Yes.
That's the same Jen. I think it is.
I have no idea. The same Jen that you met. Let's say it is.
Can you figure that out too? Can you use
I'll try
Google
to-
and figure
I'll try
that
to
out?
Google.
Thank you.
I'm sure she's watching and she'll write and be like, yes, that was
that
me.
was me. I'm pretty sure it was a Jen that said she won the whatever you said it was.
Yes.
the social engineering competition.
That's right.
thing. Yes.
From DEF CON 23.
Yes.
Yes. And then we also have another one, Whitney Maxwell, that I think is super interesting. She didn't win the black badge, but I think she's a winner in this way because one of the things that Chris Hadnagy does is when you sign up, you get assigned to a target, I think weeks or months in advance, so you can kind of do a lot of the the reconnaissance ahead of time, do your open source intelligence, get all that information gathered. And he also kind of, I saw that he charges like a $20 deposit to make sure that you show up because people don't show up for some reason. I guess, in the moment of seeing all those people, it looks like there's probably 300-400 people in the recon village easily. And you got to sit up there and sit in that glass box and do it all on your own. So I guess that could probably scare people off, either that or maybe some other Vegas flu or something else that can kind of come up. So I guess Whitney said she was just kind of walking by one time at DEF CON 23 with like 2 hours before it was going to happen. And Chris Hadnagy was like, do you want to jump in? She's like, sure, I'll do that. So she had no notice, no warning, she didn't get to do any kind of recon, and she came in 3rd place.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I thought so too. So I think, to me, that's a winner. So she's also going to be on the panel, just kind of being able to be, because
I don't think I've met her. Just throwing that out there.
Okay.
Because Jen, I definitely think I did meet.
Okay.
And who's this Chris Hagney?
Head nagging?
Hagney?
The human hacker.
Daedry?
Human hacker. I think I've met.
Date.
I've met her or him before. Wait, never mind. It'll come to me. Keep going.
Okay, we'll keep going.
He'll come on you. I mean.
Yep. So one of the things that I think is going to be pretty interesting to hear from Whitney is a lot of social engineering is being able to think on your feet and being able to kind of be in the moment and understand what direction that the conversation is going. And for her to have almost no ability to do any kind of recon, no ability to prep.
Did he have his own TV show where he like hacked into a
No. That was Chris Nickerson.
Oh. Okay.
Tiger Team. I'm a huge fan.
Sorry.
Such a fanboy.
Can't continue, please.
Okay. So
It's good, Rye.
we'll just kind of keep going with this here.
Just ignore Paul. Keep going.
Sorry.
Which
I'll try and compose myself. No promises, though.
it's been a long day for you.
It has been a very long day for me.
Paul's getting
I've
punchy
talked to
already.
so many vendors in the past day and a half. My head's just spinning. I'm loopy.
That must be fun. All right.
Sometimes it was.
So kind of going along the same lines of being able to just kind of think on your feet is one of the things that I've heard about to do when you're a social engineer is to never use a pretext that you don't know. And if you start going into an area where you don't really know what you're talking about, you're probably going to walk yourself down some kind of dead end.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to also have this talk by Tiger Interpangian, and he's going to be talking about, the name of his talk is Becoming a Human Nmap, which he's talking about kind of sounds to me based on the description, because again, he's somebody that just turned in a description. I haven't seen his full talk yet. It sounds as though he's kind of a jack of all trades, where he's well read, he learns all kinds of things. So it sounds as though pretty much whatever direction that his social engineering goes in, that he's probably going to be okay with that. So I think he's kind of talking about that a little bit.
Wait, was Chris at Stake and
Stop.
at Verico?
Move on. Move on.
Oh no, wait, that's Chris Weisopel. Never mind. Carry on.
How many Chris's can you come up with?
No, don't egg me on, Patrick. Just trying to get me to stop, and you're egging me on.
Wait, wasn't he the guy that played Mr. Robot? No, that was Christian. Never mind.
This is awesome.
Gotta go.
I missed you guys.
So can I be, since we're like being goofy, can I be a little bit disruptive?
Sure.
Little known secret, you know my feelings about pen testing, but you probably don't know my feelings about social engineering.
Oh, this is going to be good.
I thought he was going to say, but you
my...
probably don't know my feelings about PCI. But do tell us about your feelings about social engineering, because I'm eager to hear this.
Well, used to do it a long time ago, and kind of went off and did that PCI thing, and came back, and I was surprised to see how much social engineering had grown. I've always thought it's kind of pointless, because what do you do with the results? Because you almost always win. Do you fire the people that did something stupid, or do you train them and educate them? And my thought is always, why don't you just assume you're going to be successful and fast forward to the training and educating? I will throw that out there. I have more thoughts on it, but I'll throw that out there just to be a little bit disruptive. Why the heck? Why a whole conference on social engineering?
I think that's certainly a great question.
It is.
And I like how, Jeff, you're talking about you think that you're always going to win when you do a social engineering engagement. And to some degree, that may be right. And the way that I often look at the penetration testing that we do is, I know some people kind of look at it as like, yeah, let's go hack stuff and break things. And I try to more look at it as like creating a partnership and a team with the company or the target that we're doing the penetration test with, and helping them to kind of lock down their security, make their security better. And I understand that, and that's kind of where I let off with this, that you're right, that the social engineering is probably going to win, because I think that is probably the area that has been not as focused on over the last few years, that that the networks have had all their kind of different products and different focus on it. The web applications have had their focuses, and people aren't really thinking so much yet about the social engineering. So I think having a a whole conference on social engineering and kind of building up what that topic is going to be, and being able to talk with people about, here are the problems with social engineering, here are the types of things that social engineers do, is going to really help to kind of build up that awareness. And even for my conference, like one of the areas that I'm trying to get the word out for now is not so much making it another IT security conference, but making it something that any kind of stakeholders, any kind of businesses should have an interest in. And I've even talked to individual businesses about this. For example, a lawyer's office. A lawyer's office probably doesn't think, tremendously about this kind of thing, but those are certainly records that people want to get access to. If you can get access to mergers and acquisitions, imagine the kind of money that you can make off of that kind of thing. You go into the doctor's office and they start just kind of calling out names. To me, like when they call out in the doctor's office that Patrick Laverty, you're next. To me, like, I haven't looked at it yet, but is that a violation of HIPAA that they're calling out my name in a doctor's office in front of all the other patients?
Yes.
These are the kind of things that I would like to kind of help to make people more aware of, to kind of lock down these areas to make it better in the future. Because I think this is probably a direction that the hackers, the malicious actors, whatever you want to refer to them as, are probably going to go in the next direction. Because
you just need to use your social security number when they call you out in the doctor's office. That'd be better.
Oh, okay. Can certainly do that as well.
Paul, we're talking now.
Still my show, Jeff. Still my show.
It's not Jeff
pull
Security
it together,
Weekly.
man.
So I think Patrick has a point, though. When you look at, even as a security professional, and try and identify social engineering, largely it's because we've been exposed to this culture. We've read books and even done it in our own penetration testing and gain experience in social engineering. So we have our guard up and are able to identify it. Sometimes not always correctly. It really sucks when you are succumb to that and be like, I really shouldn't have clicked on that link. Usually we know what to do right after that to prevent bad things from happening, but it does happen to everyone that we click on stuff where you're like, oh no, crap. Or you can identify, or you're overly kind of cautious and you're like, I'm not opening that because I think it's a really good social engineering. But when you go to validate it, you're like, oh no, someone really did actually intend to send me that document or that link or whatever. So being able to take what we know as security professionals and instill that in what Patrick is saying, if we get other people from other industries and businesses to give them that knowledge, really helps them understand the threats as well as the risk, and can hopefully be more aware of that.
Right. And I think we use social engineering in our
Is
industry.
that better, Jeff?
Much better.
And I think we use social engineering in our industry as a sort of the end-all, be-all of, oh my God, danger. But if you think about what humans actually do on any given day, we're involved in some sort of social engineering in any case. Like, we think about before we started the show, who made my drink?
I did.
Yeah, why? Because they said, Paul, what are we drinking?
Right.
I social engineered you into making me a drink.
You did. You didn't even have to use sudo.
I know, but if
need
you
to work on my security.
If you think about the way you interact with humans every day, there's some element of social engineering to try to convince someone to do something for you that maybe they normally wouldn't. Like Johnny going next door to get some ice.
Yeah.
And what did you say to tell
He's
him?
incentivized to do that.
Right. He's incentivized to do that, but what is he going to do to get that to happen? What did you say to him to do?
I said the girl working is probably cute or something.
No,
along those lines.
You told him, tell the bartender she looks really nice today.
Oh yeah, yeah.
won't have any problem.
I did teach him how to do it without even thinking about it. I taught him how to do social engineering.
I rest my case. Yeah. Rest my case.
And taught him how to sexually harass all at the same time.
No, that's not sexual harassment. Now, come on now.
Jeff. You look really nice. You look really nice today.
Exactly. Complimenting someone is not necessarily
because he does. I mean, look at him.
Constitute.
He looks nice.
Sexual
I do
harassment.
look nice today, and it's getting warm in here all of a sudden.
Now you're sexually harassing me.
So let me go back to a couple things that have been said, because it was a loaded question, obviously, or maybe not so obviously. I think that what you're trying to say is that social engineering, that's the context, but there's a larger issue in our industry, and you touched on it a little bit, that the focus has been on technology. The talk that I went around and gave last year was does DoD security work in the real world? And what I was getting at is the way I learned security way back in the dark ages was you understood what it was that you had that you wanted to protect, what was valuable, and what were the different levels of value, and you made decisions based on protecting specific data. I think one of the problems that is rife in our industry and beyond the whole society is given the rate that technology is advancing, we're relying at times too heavily on the technology, or we think the technology solves all our problems, and we've either, I think for some of we've forgotten, but largely we have never taught or we have never educated our customers on the larger premises and ideals of security, which have to do with, I think, a lot of the things that are brought out in social engineering, making people think about their behaviors, making people think about what is it that they have that's sensitive information that somebody else might be interested in having, or simply might be interested in stealing, or whatever. These days it's mostly people.
And that's a great point,
profit.
Jeff. Like making people understand that the information they have could be valuable, and that people that aren't supposed to have it or have access to something will use them to do it. So making people aware that someone might call you and ask you your password, or someone might call you and ask you to send them an email or click on a link in an email, or someone might ask you to hold the door open for them, making them understand that, look, there are rules regarding the data and or facilities that we have. You have to follow those rules. And just explaining those rules and how sensitive things are can inherently, I think is what you're saying, Jeff, like inherently help people overcome some social engineering attacks.
And I think also along the same lines of what you're saying is, I'm sure you guys and others have done the same thing, like on a explaining to people how important that something as simple as password security is, and having a weak password. Just a few weeks ago, I was probably everybody's been able to do this on penetration tests, where you successfully guess a password from the outside and you get all the way inside, all the way to compromising the entire domain. And most people probably just think, oh, well, that's just my weak password. If somebody gets my password, they're attacking me. Whereas that's one of the things that I really want to get across to people is that these kinds of issues are going to be, maybe it's not a weak password, maybe it's going to be clicking on a phishing link, maybe it's going to be holding the door open for somebody, where then the entire company gets compromised, gets all the financials, all that kind of information all gets leaked right there.
You are merely a means to an end.
But out of curiosity, since obviously you do a lot of social engineering, or and Larry, you said you do it too. When you have some sort of social engineering exercise as part of an engagement, and let's take a leap and say that you're successful to some degree, what do you do then with that information? How do you share that with the customer, and talk a little bit about the interaction, and how do you turn it into a learning experience?
Yeah, that's certainly a
great question.
Yeah. One of the things that I never want to see happen is I never want to see somebody get fired over it. So usually that's kind of an area, and those kind of results are probably the same kind of results that we put in with any other type of penetration test as well, where we're not really looking to call out individuals. Every so often, you will certainly get somebody that says that they want to go after their people who kind of make mistakes. But really what you want to do is to kind of, from our perspective, make this as much about education as possible. Kind of let the people that I'm working with understand that this may be actually your failure, not the person's failure that we were able to social engineer, because it's your job to train these people and make these people to better understand why these kind of things are important. So I'm not going to kind of be all in their face in that kind of way, but that's probably more of the direction that I would probably want to try to get things to go. Like, we were able to do X, Y, and Z, so let's take a look at what is the training that you're doing. What types of things have you talked to your people about? We were able to get in through this vector. Is that something that you have talked to your people about, and why that's important? Because, look, the penetration testers were able to find it, so, the people trying to get in that aren't penetration testers are probably doing the same thing.
I think it's similar to a tabletop exercise for incident response, right? It shows you where some of your weaknesses are. And the entire goal, I feel, that a tabletop exercise should have is that when you identify areas of weakness, that those are things you work on. I think a social engineering exercise is very similar. When there's success, that's the areas that we need to work on. It's discovering, what those areas are that are a huge part of the exercise. So it's a learning moment. And I've also found, and Larry, I know you've experienced this firsthand. We've done it together, actually. That when
we've done this type of testing.
Yes, together.
In a partnership.
We've done lots of things together, but many of those can't be mentioned on air. But when you do a successful social engineering test, when you go back or you ask that client or employee months later or even a year later about social engineering attacks, they're like, "Oh no, I saw how that happened last time. It was kind of embarrassing. I want to use my newfound skills." So when they get a call or an email or notice someone in the facility that shouldn't be there, they're like, "Well, stop that person. This shouldn't happen." And they make some of the best employees that understand their role in security. The problem that I have with that is that employees are ephemeral. People come, people go. I mean, that's just the way it works in pretty much every industry, any business.
Some people come more often than others.
And go more often than others.
Absolutely.
So that your skill set can go out the window. So that makes it a constant exercise, which is why I think another reason why this is important.
The other one I will add that while it's a social engineering exercise, it also it takes only one person to get compromised during that engagement or in any of those types of things. I think it's also a really great challenge on the technical side for those defending networks as an opportunity to do some very detailed detection. So if Paul, if I'm able to get you to turn over my username and password, and I use those as the attacker in some unusual way because it's outside of standard,
you should see that.
That should be something you should be able to detect. You should be able to start
lots of vendors I talk with in the past day and a half so they can do that.
Detect lateral movement, detect data exfiltration.
UEBA is a huge now what I believe feature. You see logarithm advertising UEBA. It's a feature, and it's one of the features that can help detect this type of activity. One of the vendors I was talking with, I don't remember which one, but they said that basically they can see if like there's the same user account in use in multiple physical locations. Rather than just kicking both people off, they can say, well, okay, both of you who claim to be the same person, go initiate your two-factor authentication for me again. Even though it's cached and you didn't have to get in or whatever, both of you redo that again. And my kind of question was, well, what if they don't have
two-factor?
What if they don't have two-factor, or what if both people really do successfully two-factor authenticate? Like that, you're gonna call security in both those locations and figure out what's going on. But they'll alert you to that. Actually, I think that was an HP conglomeration they created. Way too much to talk about that here. But yeah,
and I think also back to what Jeff was saying in terms of when you're actually doing the test and going through, earlier we talked about what happens when the employees or the people fail. The other side is when people do the right thing.
Sure.
And that's something you definitely do want to call out. Those are ones that I really like. I consider it a win, even for myself, if somebody calls me out. For example, one time I was doing a phone social engineering.
I never really liked doing the phone. I give everyone credit that does it.
And I know most people say that kind of thing. Most people say they like being in person. Personally, I think being in person is so much harder.
Well, it's equally as nerve-wracking, certainly, or maybe more nerve-wracking because you're physically there.
Yeah, it would be more nerve-wracking for me because I think my face turns bright red. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm saying. Versus when I'm on the phone, I can be smiling, my face can be bright red, I can be sweating. They have no idea.
When we were in the team, when I was actually doing this type of work, I would have other people more skilled in social engineering than I. And I would kind of do like the physical assessment. So I'd be like, all right, you know what? While you're talking to the security guard, I'm just going to walk in and there's like a back room with a conference room behind the security desk that I just walked into. And I'm going to plug my device in, rearrange things so no one sees it. And then that was like my role because the social engineering stuff is fascinating.
They were the diversion.
You just kind of slipped in with the crowbar. And
yeah.
So yeah, I remember this one call I was on. And what I was trying to do was I had spoofed their VPN, and I told them like I'm calling from the IT security department. We had a breach, and we're trying to see if everybody's credentials have been breached. So what we do is we set up this page. We need you to log in, and it'll tell you if your credentials were breached. So can you just go to that? And a sad number of people actually did it. But I had this one woman on the phone, and she's like, "I know what you're doing. I know who you are. I'm part of the IT security lunch meeting, and you're a social engineer."
Wow.
Yeah,
Props to her. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's why I made sure I spelled that out in the report. And I was like, that is awesome. I'm so glad that you're saying that kind of thing. I totally understand where you're coming from, but can you fill it out anyway for me?
Ma'am, can I get your name?
And wait,
Can
and
you
did
spell
she?
that for
Well,
us?
she was like, okay, what do you want me to do? I was like, just put in your username, put in your password. Don't tell it to me, because you're right. I could be a social engineer, and you never want to give that to anybody over the phone. So just put it in. She's like, okay, I'll put it in.
Oh.
She didn't, though. I was
Oh,
so...
she didn't.
No,
Oh,
she
okay,
didn't.
good. Good.
The-
Yes.
the other one that was my favorite during that same engagement was I was talking to this one woman, and she was like, oh, what do you need me to do? And then I could hear in the background some other woman yell, don't you dare do that. Hang up right now. She's like, I got to go.
Wow.
And I was like, great.
Awesome.
So those were a couple that I called out specifically in the report by name,
Right.
exactly what they did, because those are the things that we do want, their employer to know. Like, these are the ones that are working. Maybe you can go talk to them and find out, like, what was it that tripped it off for you? That
And have them spread the message.
absolutely.
Yep. We've had some great ones that we've done. That one of our guys, Jimmy, one of the founders of InGuardians, has done some masterful stuff. That along the lines of calling up the outsourced help desk and calling up and say, yeah, I can't remember my password. Can you reset it for me? And they said, well, I see that you don't have a security question set, so would you like to set it now? Yes, please. Okay, so then I can reset your password. They got better. The next one was, I see you don't have a security question set, so would you like to set it now? Yes, please. Well, but because you didn't have one set before this call, I can't reset the password for you. Oh, well, is there anything you can do? I've got to get this report to so and so, and they've got to get it in the next half hour. Can you call my supervisor? Oh, yeah, absolutely. We can call your supervisor. Do you have their number? Yes.
Here it is.
Yes.
555.
Yes, we do. 555-1212. Yeah. Call the supervisor.
Oh, that was
Somebody
your number?
Right.
You were the supervisor?
Somebody else was the supervisor.
Yeah.
Teamwork.
And you answer, and it's, what do you want? I'm on vacation.
Yes. So
This
it's as short as possible.
This better be
yeah.
fast. Yeah, reset the damn password. Click.
But again, other than these being fun stories to share, where was the learning experience in that? And you bring up Jimmy. Jimmy and I used to work together, because I'm sitting here thinking, my first social engineering exercise was probably over 20 years ago. The first time we did a phishing attack was probably 23 years ago. So my secondary question is, what's changed? How has the craft of social engineering evolved in the last, let's say, round off 20 years? But the first question is, other than fun stories, tell me about the benefit. Tell me about how people learned a lesson and did better moving on.
Jeff, specifically in my case, the call center, after numerous tests, refined their processes and procedures and their training. And by the time that was actually done, we were unable to successfully social engineer someone to get a password changed in their call center. And then they changed call center folks, and we redid the test, and it was like cakewalk again. They knew now what to do. They knew how to educate that call center as to some of the things that they had apparently missed during some of the changes. So the process improvement for tightening their security overall was a huge benefit in some of those cases.
Yeah, I also had
let me interject real quick, and then I'll let you guys answer my questions. But when we used to do social engineering 20 years ago, what was popular then was to outsource security. It was called managed security services back then. So, you were hiring companies to do your firewall monitoring and intrusion detection and stuff like that. There, I think it's absolutely fair game to try to, or even physical security guards. In the early days, it was funny because people used to say, well, we don't want to outsource security. I'm like, so are the security guards at the front desk your employees? Oh, no, they're such and such a company. I'm like, okay, so you do outsource security. Oh, yeah. But, if it's a third party, I think it's absolutely fair game to test them to make sure that they're meeting their contractual obligations. But go ahead.
Yeah, I also remember, along the same lines of what Larry was just kind of talking about, had a another phone social engineering engagement, and the scope was kind of just wide open. Do whatever you want to try to get any kind of information, which is also kind of interesting. So one of the things, we just kind of went after the typical. It's like, let's see if we can get a password change through the help desk. So usually one of the first kind of reconnaissance kind of calls is, what information are they going to need in order to change it? Because we weren't given any kind of information. So we start calling the first few times, and they're like, well, you need to answer some kind of questions. So they start asking the questions, and of course, I didn't know what the questions were going to be the first few times, so I'm just kind of guessing through them and like, nope, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And then finally, eventually, we figured out that we needed to answer 3 out of 4 correct. So the questions were, I think, home address, personal email address, personal phone number, and also last 4 of social. And I was like, oh, okay. So those are the types of things that we need to go back and do some kind of reconnaissance on. So we started calling a few more times, knowing that it's pretty hard to get the last 4 compared to those other 3. There's sources out there, whether they're paid or open source, where you can find somebody's home address, you can find their email address, you can find their phone number. So
you can always go on the dark web and try and find their social security number, but
Oh, I can never remember the last 4 of my social. You got another question?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of where we went. We kind of went on the privacy angle. We're like, well, that's not something I want to disclose. Haven't you seen some of the issues that other companies have had where they kind of validate on that? And we were really pushing them toward the other 3. And then finally, after a number of calls, they were like, no, we just had a policy change because something's going on where people keep calling for password changes. And now the last 4 are required, or we have to call your department head, at our directory phone number and get this approved. So that was kind of an instance where during the course of the 5-day test, the internal policy changed.
That's awesome.
And made it more secure. And on Friday when we had the debrief call, I had the CIO and a few different people, and I was walking them through it, and I was like, oh, by the way, is the head of the help desk there? Like, oh yeah, he's kind of in the back. And like, they kind of also mentioned how he's smiling like the Cheshire Cat because he knew what was happening. So I just kind of said, well, whatever he did was a really good thing. He stopped us, and there was not much more we could do unless there's somewhere that we can get access to your employees' social security numbers. So that was kind of the learning, the education, where this company changed their policy based on us trying to kind of work with what they currently had, where they thought they had it locked down. It's like, these 4 questions, only those people are going to know those questions, and they should be able to get at least 3 of them right. And
you really only know that your policies and procedures are working if you test them, right? Like, how do you know what you're doing or not doing today? The likelihood that you'll fall victim to a social engineering attack, unless you actually put your employees through it.
Yeah.
I feel like you're
testing for the positive condition is great, but you also have to test for the negative.
And stuff changes all the time, right? You may change the single sign-on service you're using. You might change a policy or a procedure. You might change your 2-factor authentication. You might change what questions you're asking of people, how you're asking the questions, based on your technology or just policy and procedure changes or improvement for better, worse, or indifferent. So being able to test where you are today is important to make sure that you've made those adjustments, like in your story, Patrick, where you talked about they actually said, well, if we don't think we're under attack, 3 out of 4 is okay. If we feel like we are being attacked, then make that a requirement. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Awesome. And I think that's probably the reason for any kind of penetration test, is just to kind of see what is your current stance, where are your holes, because I think anybody who's in charge of a network or in charge of any company security might have their own biases and kind of see, like, I think that we're rock solid around this kind of thing, and I think there's no way anybody can get in. And it's kind of nice having a third party to kind of come at them and look for those kind of unbiased, outside, black box types of holes that might be there.
Do we answer your questions, Jeff?
Yep, I do want to share one story, maybe 2. I was doing what we would have called a vulnerability assessment, probably back in the late 90s. It was for a pharmaceutical company, and we were doing penetration testing, but we were doing it on site, sort of from the internal perspective. And so we would show up at, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 o'clock, and we were going through all the procedures at the security desk to get authorized entry and go in. Actually, there is 2 stories here. I was sort of the supervisor, so I had another guy with me that was doing a lot of the testing, and I was just sort of free to walk around. And I remember I was I was like in a closet that was down the hall from the office that we were supposed to be staying in one night. And it was probably like 2 o'clock in the morning. And the security guard was making his rounds. And I'm sure he knew that who we were and why we were there. But I was in the middle of their equipment closet or something, or their phone closet. And I'm like, where are all these wires going to? And he just kind of walked by and said, hey, how you doing? I'm like, okay, I'm doing great. And I always thought that was kind of funny. And then the other story was the last day we checked in at normal hours, and we had spent every day it had taken like 15-20 minutes to get through security just to get in the building. And while we're waiting to get checked in for like our out briefing, some person walked up to the desk and said, hey, my wife works here, I don't, but I need to go to the credit union, is it still downstairs? And the guard's like, oh yeah, go ahead. And the guy walked right past. And my buddy and I, we just kind of looked at each other like, man, if we were doing social engineering, we just figured out how to do it.
What was I going to say? I think we're just getting ready to wrap up, so we'll get some more drinks in between segments.
That sounds awesome.
Does that sound good?
Yes, please.
I did have another question, but my glass being empty is very distracting. So I don't
Priorities.
Oh, what was the Chris?
Is there another Chris?
Roberts. Isn't the Chris the one that did the plane
sideways
plane hacking thing?
Yep.
He wasn't really
Dragon.
hacking. That's not the Chris. Different Chris.
Different Chris.
Different Chris.
Another Chris.
Can we
That's good. You thought of another Chris.
Yes.
And of course, since I'm here to promote the conference, can I at least tell people how to find out more about it?
Yes, we should do that.
We should do that.
I was not going to end the segment.
Oh, and there's another person that I think you know.
Oh.
Who's going to be speaking there?
Is it Chris?
Is it April?
It's April Wright.
Love April.
She's
awesome.
The best. Yeah, she's going to be talking about how to get management buy-in at work and social engineering at work.
It's awesome.
That's totally going to be awesome. So our conference website is se-ri.org, and we're also offering a little bit of a discount for a week, just for
1 week, limited time offer.
1 week for Security Weekly listeners only. So if you go to the website, we're selling our tickets through Eventbrite. So if you want to go buy your tickets and you want to get $10 off, you can do that with Security Weekly 10 as the discount code. So at se-ri.org. We have all the presentations listed there. We have a whole bunch of information.
We're not the slides, just the titles and descriptions.
So far, right. We might have the slides at some point if you want to see pictures of kittens and things.
True.
So yeah, we'll have that eventually. And I think we're also going to have some workshops, some training.
Nice.
That's going to be happening. We're going to have a class on social engineering, class on ethical hacking.
Is that Chris guy going to actually be there?
I don't know. I'm hoping.
Okay.
That'll be awesome if that Chris guy is going to be there.
Then I could probably remember who he. I knew if I saw him, I think I'd remember.
I'll introduce you.
Who he is?
You might.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
And one of the other fun things that I'm actually putting together right now is going to be an OSINT capture the flag competition. So I think that could make it a little bit fun as well. So
Very cool.
Fantastic.
That's what we got.
With that, we're going to take a short break. Come back, talk about security news for this week. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement, securityweekly.com/on-demand. Check out our on-demand webcast, all kinds of fun content there that you can register for. John and I did a webcast on pen testing. It's there. 3, 4, what? Oh, anyway, check it out, securityweekly.com/on-demand. And now, the security news for this week. Woo! I'm here with the same cast of characters. My question for the panel is, did anyone see this MikroTik router OS vulnerability and associated exploit?
No, but
damn it, I was hoping someone else did.
But that's kind of interesting because now I may need to update a MikroTik router that I'm going to use next week at Sans Austin.
You were the second person that I told them that there was a vulnerability in MikroTik routers, that they were like, oh crap, gotta go. Got some updating to do.
Yep.
It looks like there is a fix for it. What I find interesting is there's an exploit in ExploitDB, and it's called the Shime Red Stack Clash Remote Code Execution exploit.
Chime
Apparently,
Red.
and named after the beer, Chime Red, a
Wow.
Belgian beer, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
Trappist ale. Anyway, I don't know how that's relevant to the exploit, but
Maybe it's
useless knowledge from here at Security Weekly. It is a Belgian Trappist ale.
somebody's favorite beer.
Someone's favorite beer. Maybe the person who found the vulnerability.
Or what they were drinking when they found it.
Yep, could
And,
be.
Paul-
Like what popular virus that came out in 2001? Named after a popular beverage? I think it was 2001. So my trivia questions. You don't remember? Malware? A worm that was a worm?
Was it Code Red?
It was Code Red, yes. Thanks to whoever had that.
Mountain Dew Code Red?
Mountain Dew Code Red.
Gross.
Do you know one of the people that's discovered that vulnerability? They were on the show.
Who hasn't been on the show, Paul?
Eugene Kaspersky, Near from Palo Alto. They're on my hit list to be on the show, not for any other purpose than
Nice.
to make an appearance on one of our shows.
I sent. Speaking
Oh,
of,
it was Mark Mayfrey was one of the discoverers.
yes. I sent you a link in Slack.
Oh, now everyone has to forget that, or I have to write new questions now. I should know better not to ask the questions that I ask, because now everyone knows. Well, there you go. There's one question. So if you listen to the show, you'll do one question better.
Make sure you use your OSINT and listen to the show, and you get the answers.
Or read the transcripts.
Or there are no
such as Security Now episode 224.
Is it 224, Larry? Is that?
I sent you a link in Slack if you have Slack.
Funny
up
piece
on
of history.
Yeah.
Apparently.
That would
Anyway.
be Slack as opposed to
Slack. I'm there. I'm with you. I was getting there.
Gotcha.
It's,
Yep.
So, what else is going on? I don't have any more information about the MikroTik.
remote code execution, though. Did they say the method of remote code execution?
It was called I do have another story on it.
Okay.
Which doesn't, I read it, but unfortunately doesn't tell you much other than there's malware out there affecting, nicknamed Slingshot, affects routers and computers connected to them in 2 phases, runs hostile kernel code, and really, like ads, go away. The second stores malware files in an encrypted virtual file system. It can even shut down the components itself. It was founded by Kaspersky. It's likely, they say, government agency behind it, given the sophistication. The worst part is the malware has been infecting MikroTik routers and possibly other brands since 2012.
Interesting.
I thought that was very interesting. Again, I wish I had a lot more technical details. I was at a conference. I have not read the exploit code other than a couple of the comments at the top, which say she may read. And it was tested on router OS 6.38.4. on a MIPS-based processor. I'll spare you the details of the MIPS processor because there's lots of different types. Yeah, so interesting.
Ooh, I'm taking a Python class. This makes sense to me now.
Yes, and it's written in Python, yes, Larry. So yes, this might be a good exercise for you before you update your MikroTik router to see if you can get this exploit working.
Uh-huh.
But it's not written in Python today.
Yes. A lot of uncommented out lines over here, too, from the shellcode.
Ooh, struct.
Yeah, it actually looks like pretty interesting code to read. So that link is in the show notes.
I learned about struct pack today, so that's
nice.
It's a good thing.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you see this article, which unfortunately I can't bring up in any good format, from Robert Graham at Erotisec wrote an article about, I guess John Oliver covered Bitcoin in a show.
He did.
And so did you watch that
I
one?
did.
What did you think of that? I don't know if you follow. I don't follow Bitcoin as closely as maybe I should, but
Yeah, I'm probably one of those people who just kind of see Bitcoin and like my eyes glaze over a little bit, and it's one of those things like about all I know about Bitcoin is to stay out of it because it doesn't seem like probably a good investment at this point. And I also remember watching the show this past Sunday night because around here I think it's on Sunday nights at 11 or something like that. And as soon as he started going into Bitcoin, he admitted, he was like, you know, this is going to be extremely high level for anybody that knows anything about this.
Sure.
You know, if you know about Bitcoin, you're technical, then we're not going into any kind of depth. And I also remember, like, I love John Oliver. He's one of my favorite shows to watch. And last year, he had some kind of show where he was talking about, like, nuclear waste. And somebody days later did, like, this takedown on, like, so many reasons that John Oliver was wrong. And one of the things, like, John Oliver is talking about, like, you know, we have all these tons of nuclear waste, and then it's like hundreds of tons and thousands of tons that are all over the place, and we're disposing it. And then somebody was talking about, like, well, do you understand how heavy nuclear waste is? Just because it's tons, it doesn't mean that that takes up a whole lot of space.
No, that's true.
So that kind of made me think, it's like, okay, well, that makes perfect sense. And if John Oliver was wrong about that, and I read this takedown, how many other times is John Oliver wrong about things when he kind of starts going? So now I try to watch him with a little bit more of a critical eye when he's like, A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. And
now
it's
we're
like,
fact-checking John Oliver.
But now my question really is, how heavy is nuclear waste? And is it really they make that much of a difference?
Let's go to Jeff, who works for the nuclear... Wait, can we say where you work, Jeff? Was that on air that you said that before?
Don't say that.
Larry, would you believe that?
I am currently detailed with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
You had me bored there for a second.
I don't honestly know how much a ton of nuclear waste weighs, but I'll
We need to get an expert.
I know that.
I do know how much a ton of nuclear waste weighs.
Exactly the same as a ton of feathers.
Exactly. It weighs exactly 1 ton.
But it does not weigh the same as a ton of gold.
Yes, it does.
What
It's
is
exactly the same as the ton of gold. It
Because
just
gold
requires
is
a different
measured
volume.
by troy weight scales, and everything else is measured avout de poids.
What is the specific
All right.
gravity of the nuclear waste is really what I want to know.
I think he just referenced Troy, who was on Mr. Robot.
He did.
Anyway,
But
Jeff, you need to get an
I
expert
have another point in there somewhere.
from your
that's
work
gone.
to come on and talk about how much a ton of nuclear waste actually weighs.
Yeah. So yeah.
What I was going to say was, in my Jedi Mind Trick course, I talk about when you're trying to explain complex things to people that don't understand or don't know. I say, it's okay. You absolutely need to simplify the conversation. And I will say, and I'll let you guys weigh in on your opinions, but I think it's okay in your attempts to oversimplify things to make slight little errors and, not be technically accurate if you're kind of getting the point across, because the people that don't understand or know anyway, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting the point across. So I don't necessarily would knock John Oliver for taking on something as complex as Bitcoin and a blockchain drink.
He does. We're drinking on blockchain now. That's awesome. So he does say that some of the things that John Oliver said were correct. Some of them he specifically calls out as being incorrect, such as that currencies have value because people agree that they have value. Like how they agree that a Beanie Baby is worth
$15,000. And then
Look at our whole monetary system is based on value that we assign essentially to stuff that we dig up out of the ground.
not really even anymore.
Not anymore, but that's the history of it, though.
Right.
But what Robert was saying is that
Yeah.
I thought this was fast, not really security related, to be honest with you, but that I never thought of it this way, that money is a good, right? It's not just this intangible thing. It is a good. When I give someone money in exchange for gasoline, like it's actually a
good
trade of goods,
Right.
more so than it is like money as like this abstract thing.
And
It's
that good is representing something that you can
something
use,
of value.
something of value that you can use to
Right.
obtain other goods with.
And we could use
you
gasoline
might need
as
to define what a good is to the millennials that are listening.
true, but
It's the opposite of bad.
you could use gasoline as
Right.
your good, right?
Right.
And exchange that for other things, but it's not as easily stored or transported as money is, and that's why we use one reason why we use
and that was
money.
what Jeff was saying, is that we used to represent money with things that we dig out of the ground, because the things that we dig out of the ground are difficult to obtain and hard to transport. Whereas this piece of paper says that this is worth so much of that thing that we dug out of the ground.
I mean, we literally, in terms of our money, the reason why a quarter of a dollar, a quarter is called a quarter, is because people used to mint coins that they deemed worth a dollar, whether it was gold or silver, and they would actually cut it into pieces in order to make change. So a quarter of a dollar would be this pie-shaped segment of what used to be like a gold doubloon or something like that.
Yep, pieces of eight. Pieces of eight.
Pieces of eight.
Anyway,
and now we're doing this
good
all
article.
electronically in the ether, and people are up in arms about it. But I don't think in some way it's any sillier than the way that we've built our monetary system historically.
Right. Then the thing that I think is interesting about this article, where they're claiming that John Oliver was patently was wrong about a lot of things and that it was not useful. I think for the masses, it was really useful for them to help understand this type of stuff, because if you think about the average audience that the news and the paper is trying to reach, is someone with a 6th grade education level. So, explaining blockchain to a 6th grader.
I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but the ones that listen to John Oliver are probably slightly more educated.
I would agree.
Just saying.
I would agree, but that is the typical stance for.
There's not many
Yes.
news and
6th graders
crap.
up at 11 p.m.
No.
That's true.
What's up next, Paul?
Next.
Yeah, there was another point in that article, but not really. It's more security related about.
Well,
the way he described
to summarize, I don't think we need to knock John Oliver
No,
for trying to take something complex and make
Correct.
it understandable to the
No, we're in
to the
agreement.
layman.
He does talk about turning chicken into a McNugget, and how you can't reverse the process, which is, of course, more like a one-way hash algorithm and not so much the way that Bitcoin works. That part was more security related.
Yep.
And things that we talk about.
Yep.
So
You can't take a McNugget and turn it into a chicken.
correct.
I mean, you could, but it'd be a really shitty chicken.
It would be not a really great chicken. Yes. I have not read about the new AMD vulnerability because I was at a conference.
Which one?
I don't know. All I read was that Linus Torvalds was up in arms about this, and he said the last security advice is basically if you replace the BIOS or CPU microcode of an evil version, you might have a security problem. So that was his, of course, take on many security vulnerabilities that they're not really security vulnerabilities.
Yep.
It's a feature. It's a feature, or not important. So
Yep. And speaking of something similar too, I caught this brief flash that I meant to go back and look at and didn't get a chance to. Was some announced vulnerabilities in AMI's Secure Boot stuff that, of course, we had on the show last week.
yes,
So was kind of interesting timing for that. I literally saw it flash by. I meant to go back and read it, and then got sucked into Python for the remainder of the week. So, but I also did hear that there were more than one of the AMD vulnerabilities reported, because now apparently that's a thing.
unfortunately.
So is it, and I know you don't really maybe know the answer to this, is it like we were talking about with the chip vulnerabilities a month or so ago, is it sort of like a new class of vulnerability that's emerging?
I would say yes.
Okay.
I mean, I think the issues have been there before. When we think about what was it, the math bug with the 486, I think it's something that's been there, But
Pentium 90.
Oh, Pentium 90. Sorry.
Wow, we're going way back in
So-
history.
so
That was my first PC. Home
And-
PC.
Yep, and then the operating system had to do a patch to fix bad math. But so I think very similar types of things, but not really necessarily taken seriously. At the time, it was just, oh well, they did bad math. Now it's a little bit more serious.
I wish I had more time to read about this vulnerability. I apologize to our listeners. All I get is the Linus Torvalds thing when I start searching for it.
Yeah.
And they all use that same picture of
him
Linus
giving the
Torvalds
finger.
giving the middle finger.
Yep.
It's ridiculous.
But what was one of the other ones that I thought was there? And Paul, I saw you looking at was the memcached exploit tool.
Yeah, it's an actual exploit tool
Yep.
for that vulnerability.
And
which I thought was pretty
I was
neat.
like,
Is it in Python, Larry?
I don't know.
Oh, I think it is in
But
Python.
we did have this in the it is apt-get install Python 3, Scapian Showdown. But yeah, we had this in the show notes last week, and I don't think we ever really got a chance to talk about it. So, yeah, some tools for dealing with memcached to be able to do distributed denial service attacks.
Yes.
Yep. Good stuff.
Pre-installed malware found on 5 million popular Android phones. I mean, this is a story we just covered so much.
Shocking.
Shocking. It's like not even really news, as well as Flash vulnerabilities.
Aren't they called apps?
Pretty much, Jeff. That's,
Yes.
You know what? That's the only analysis you need of that story.
Mhm.
That's perfectly summed up.
Jeff, the only difference is that these were pre-installed, so they probably were apps. Oh no, these are the apps installed by the carriers.
Yes.
So pre-installed by the carrier, right?
Gotcha.
Nothing really to write home about on the new Flash and Windows vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I know it's not in the show notes, and I think you talked about it on one of your other shows earlier. But did you actually see a video of Alexa laughing?
Yes.
I did. We covered that
Isn't
story.
that kind of freaking creepy?
I forget when I dug into it with Keith Hoodlid on Application Security Weekly. It like wasn't. It was just like a programming flaw that would make her laugh prematurely. So if she heard the word laugh, something like that, there was no like check. Like she would just start laughing, and then they fixed the code. Like it was really not as interesting as creepy if it happens. And
but
I tell the story of when the electrician was here working and the power came back on and the Echo device came back on and said hello. He thought like a woman was standing in the room with him and he was really freaked out and he thought it was haunted. So that's pretty funny.
The sad part is because my wife heard about this thing, so she says, Alexa,
oh no,
laugh. Waiting to hear it from the other room. And it wasn't the same laugh at all. Like, not even close. Like, not that creepy type. And she did it multiple times and got the same one every time.
It was a creepy laugh.
Oh, yeah.
It was. Yeah, I remember reading it now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw a video of it, it's a really creepy laugh, and I think we're closer to Skynet than we think.
But I will say I fell victim to some of the things that we do to you here in the studio, Paul. In that was
Add
taking
stuff to my shopping cart.
Well, I was taking
like a 55-gallon drum of lube is always in my shopping cart.
Yep. Alexa.
No. Stop.
Never mind. Alexa.
No. Stop.
Are you turned on? But
now everyone listening now that has one of these devices is cursing you right now.
Well, that happened to me because I was taking 573 via on demand on my speakers in my office, and my device,
Echo device,
my Echo turns on because he's talking about the keyword that is the service that aggregates the top 1,000 websites.
Oh,
that one.
Yeah, it's an oversubscribed term.
Yeah. And talking about that, and like every 30 seconds, like, I don't understand. I can't understand. Never mind. Alexa?
No.
Tell me a joke.
Stop. No. God, no. Please, no. Her jokes are terrible, Larry. Terrible.
You're a dad. You should appreciate them.
They are bad dad jokes.
Alexa, tell me a pirate joke.
No. Oh, God. Our poor listeners. Sorry.
Pirate walks into a bar, sits down. Bartender asks him, "What's with the paper towel on your hat?" He says, "I've got a bounty on me head."
Oh, God.
How about the pirate that walks into a bar with
Jeff, why aren't you not stopping this madness? Come on now.
ship steering wheel as a belt
Well,
buckle?
because he's funny.
Oh, is that
I was
right?
just going.
Bartender
"Chris,
looks at him and goes,
who's
"Get a steering
Chris?
wheel
I
for
do- I know that
a belt buckle." Pirate says, "I'd be driving me nuts."
Oh, God. Nice. That's funny to you, Jeff. I see.
He's a dad. Just dad jokes.
Someday I'll meet this Chris character.
Gave away all my batteries today. My used batteries today. Free of
I
charge.
was gonna say.
God.
I'm sure we interviewed.
Oh,
Chris.
God. No, make it stop. Go to a new story. VMware's released security updates. That's got to be more interesting. Pirate jokes. Or not.
He wants some ninja jokes.
Just say I would have segued to the next one, given that we were talking about really bad jokes coming from an Echo.
Oh, yeah. I was trying to pull that up.
But
why
yeah,
is Siri so dumb?
I was trying to pull that up too, but apparently your ad blocking stuff doesn't allow us to do that.
Awesome. And the other website actually showed me. Oh, no, it's loading now.
Yeah, no.
Oh, no, and then it doesn't. But that's not my ad. Oh, wait.
Ad block?
With your
I
network.
was able to look at the article, but it was very laden with adware.
Oh, so I have to disable my ad blocker. I don't know if I'm willing to do that.
Well, it's
Sorry.
the network.
I think I can remember.
It's the network-based ad blocker.
Yeah, I don't know. No, that looks like it's coming from them. In any case, so I was just thinking. Now
Basically,
ads.
Siri was stupid because Steve Jobs died.
What?
Yeah,
what I
that's
got out of it.
Jeff just summed up the story that obviously you guys didn't read. Otherwise, you'd come to the same conclusion that Jeff did: is that Siri is stupid because Steve Jobs died. It's really there's nothing more to report there. Actually,
So Steve Jobs was answering all the damn queries? What? The hell?
no. They
Talk about a bus factor of 1 on Siri. God damn.
Basically, they stopped updating the code.
Oh.
And all the other services that do that obviously spend a lot of time constantly learning and training their algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
And Apple was not until more recently, which is why they came out with the HomePod. Is it called HomePod? To compete with Amazon and Google.
Wait, what? Google's HomePod, wasn't it?
No, Apple has a new home thing.
Oh, yeah.
Is that HomePod?
HomeKit.
HomeKit. Or is it a home?
HomeKit, but HomeKit is driven by Siri.
Correct. Yes, that's what the article said anyway. I think it's a home. Is it a HomePod?
I think it's
read the
HomePod.
article. I'd read the
Yeah,
article.
it's a HomePod. It's an Apple HomePod. Google's device is something different.
Yeah.
It's a whatever Google's device. is.
Either way, I'm in bed.
Next.
Alexa.
Google Home is the Google Home.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Next story.
We did promise them what happens when Bitcoin miners take over your town. Because
let's do that.
911 is a joke in your town.
that's right.
Bitcoin miners take over your town.
Apparently, there is a town where power is really cheap.
I'd venture to guess it's in Iceland.
No, it's in eastern Washington State.
Oh.
Yes.
But nobody lives in Eastern Washington State.
Apparently, some people do. I think is what the article was saying.
East Wenatchee.
Or because they were buying up property there.
Yep.
Because the price of electricity was so much cheaper because they're near some kind of power source. Some kind of water power source, I think. And so you need a location now today with Bitcoin. And people bought into this property early, and people have been buying it up since Bitcoin is becoming more popular because, again, the gist I got from the article was about half the price of what you'd normally pay. And considering that a quarter of a megawatt or even a half a megawatt is enough to light up a couple hundred homes, which is what you would need to start successfully mining Bitcoin today.
And it looks like there's lots of temporary built structures from the picture right at the top of the article, including shipping containers with big fans for cooling. Used shipping containers, I might add. That's pretty damn cool.
That's pretty cool, right?
East Wenatchee.
And they tried to pick sites that would have, good, easy cooling,
Mm-hmm.
like an old car. So they're going and buying up places that have been kind of abandoned, like an old car wash and stuff, thinking that to run all those heaters and stuff, they already have a pretty good power source that they can build upon to mine Bitcoin. And so basically there's these whole towns in like the middle of nowhere in Washington State, which made it sound like is now being filled up with all the sounds of servers and spinning fans, essentially.
Yep.
which I thought was pretty cool.
That's interesting.
Not in Iceland, right here in the U.S.
That's crazy.
Microsoft starts borrowing speculative execution exploits.
Yeah,
I always think it's interesting when large companies go out and buy exploits.
But
Keith was supposed to
speculative
be here, too.
execution in this one.
It's like
But speculative execution.
like Spectre and Meltdown is how
Yep.
I read it, right?
Yep. And they're paying quite handsomely.
It's interesting.
Yeah, $250,000.
I'm not sure why they would do that. I mean, they understand the bug well enough to try and fix it anyway. Maybe it's to get a better understanding of how to fix it.
Maybe.
Is they're trying to buy the exploit? Does buying the exploit? It's a really good question. Does buying the exploit prevent it from getting into the hands of other people?
Mm-hmm.
In that case, why is Microsoft buying it and not the government? Or the conspiracy theorist is the government is funding Microsoft to buy it and do the.
I was going to say maybe they're
research.
buying it from the government,
Or they're buying it from a government, this government, or another government.
Yeah, well, and
speculation.
And, we could have somebody like Katie Masuris come on to talk about some of the financials behind something like that. But if all of a sudden this bug, this malware or the 0-day gets out there, and what does it cost Microsoft to scramble to put together a patch for something like that? Arguably, it's more than $250,000 for them to scramble to put together the team to put together a patch.
It's a good point, Larry. If you have the exploit, developing a patch can be quicker. Now, it can also be the dangerous part, which is I'm only patching for this particular exploit and not other ways that it could be exploited. But one is reasonable to assume that once you have the exploit, that it's easier to patch.
Yep.
Just like having the patch makes it easier to write the exploit.
Right.
Just
Now
kind of
that said, if the if they have the exploit and the exploit is under embargo, it gives them more time to address the issue
Buy it up
at lower cost, and can have that longer for additional analysis to potentially fix the root cause of the problem, and not just be reactionary for that one particular exploit.
Assuming they haven't sold it to someone else or someone else hasn't stolen it or figured it out in the meantime.
Right, which we know that if one person's figured it out,
there's a lot of variables here. That's kind of pun intended, right? Not in every case does having the patch necessarily make it easier to write the exploit, or vice versa, having the exploit make it easier. I mean, there's a lot of variables in that process, which I realize is kind of ironic, but yes.
Yep. Pwn to Own 2018.
I think the Pwn to Own is really cool, but I see a lot of money being handed out for exploits. I mean, it kind of ties to our previous kind of thing. My question is, is this really news? They run Pwn to Own. People find exploits for things and they pay them. I have respect for all the people that run Pwn to Own, and all the people finding the exploits, and all the people and vendors that are participating to help fund this and then actually fixing the exploits. So, I mean, there's great work going on. I just don't know that it's necessarily newsworthy to talk about anymore.
But Pwn to Own has been going on forever, and we've talked about it on the show for years.
A long time. It was very controversial when it first came out.
But still, amazing things continue to happen that come out of this. For example, I'm reading through the article that one gentleman, Richard Zhu, earned $70,000 from exploiting Microsoft Edge. His initial attempt failed, but he was able to rework his exploit chain, which included 2 use-after-free memory vulnerabilities in the browser in combination with an integer overflow in the Windows kernel.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
And he did it live in front of the crowd.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
But that's worth $70,000 if you ask me.
Well, and you weren't there, but he was blindfolded.
And one hand tied behind his back.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I have a question though and this is probably mostly for Larry. Actually, Patrick could weigh in too, since he's a pen tester.
I'm out.
You're out, Paul.
You're a washed-up has-been.
Who's that Chris guy?
I've been thinking about this for a couple weeks because of all these devastating new vulnerabilities that have been discovered in things like the chipsets and the AMD thing earlier. And I don't even know how to phrase the question. How often do you guys in your pen tests, and I guess more importantly, how often in the breaches that we hear about, has the attack happened because of some over-the-top, dazzling, really high-tech, somebody figured out how to break something shit versus what I know we've talked about ad nauseum.
You mean
weak passwords.
When we do stuff, or when we go into an environment that's already been compromised?
Well, my question is, are we sort of creating this sort of self-perpetuating industry in terms of all these sort of high-end types of vulnerabilities and exploits? And I know they get used, but are the smart people on the good side discovering them first? I guess I'm trying to figure out, how often do the bad guys go to such great lengths to figure out all this stuff, and how much is it the good guys finding it, for good purposes, to try to make sure it nothing bad happens? I don't even know if the question makes sense. I just sometimes wonder.
I think I know where you're going with that. Like, what's the ratio of good to bad for folks finding these things? Yeah. And I think that's a really fine line, in that I think there are, more often than not now, that there are a lot of good people finding these exploits, and they get disclosed publicly after some embargo period in which the manufacturers or software vendors are given the opportunity to patch and issue patches and all this stuff and notify their customers, which I think is great. But the point that I find that is the trickiest part is that now, once you've let the cat out of the bag, I mean, you can't unimpregnate the cow. The cow is pregnant. You can't put the cat back in the bag. It's done. It's over. It's out.
Why is there a cat and a cow?
It can't be done because it's really weird. That's why. But you can't undo this action once the vulnerability in the exploit is out there.
I think I can put the question this way, and how successful would the bad guys be if all the good people that are doing the research stopped doing it, and we stopped doing disclosures altogether, and stopped doing all this bug stuff, and just kind of did something else? I mean, if it all went away, how successful would the bad guys be? They don't seem to be the ones doing all the heavy lifting here. It seems like it's mostly the good guys.
I would argue by that metric they would be 100% successful, because they would be the only people doing it.
Yeah. No, I agree with Larry, for sure. I think that it's a smaller...
I think that's simplistic. I think I want a longer answer, but okay. I see where you're going.
I'll give you a longer answer, Jeff, as soon as I figure out who Chris is. But, so... if we didn't do all this work around bug bounties and finding exploits, and we kind of left it to the bad guys, that would create a much larger black market for exploits. It also, to kind of address your question or observation, Jeff, that while I think a large percentage of evil, bad people today doing things in the internet, they're not the ones writing the exploits or discovering the vulnerabilities. That's a much smaller percentage, but if we left it to those, they would become more powerful, so to speak, and gain more money by selling those exploits. I think some of them are leaked and kind of ripped out of the underground because of things like bug bounties and larger organizations purchasing. And these could be the people who make the software, these could be nation states, and these could be there are companies who will actually purchase these and sell them in a legitimate marketplace. I'm not sure that quite helps getting them out of bad people's hands, but unless they're doing some kind of vetting process. So that's kind of my assessment, Jeff. Does that help? Is that more detailed answer that you were looking for?
Yes, I like that much better.
So I'm not sure why Microsoft would still go buy these exploits, given everything that we've talked about. There's like so much speculation. We almost needed an official word from Microsoft, and that is kind of another issue that we have today, that not Microsoft and Apple, I think, are some of the bigger offenders to not providing a lot of information as to what they're doing with security, or why they're doing things with security, or information about even potential vulnerabilities and or exploits in their own software.
So I do have a follow-up question. And I'm not saying it's appropriate for all the good guys to stop doing the research. I obviously think that's important. I just get a little bit speculative sometimes. But and you touched on, or Larry said, well, if only the bad guys were doing these things, they'd be 100% successful. But if our focus was not so much on vulnerability discovery and on detection of threats, bad actors, malicious activity, would that help to remediate? Assuming that we weren't focusing all of our limited resources on vulnerability discovery and focusing it more on, let's say, threat discovery, would that be collectively more cost effective than the current state of affairs?
I'm sorry, Jeff. Repeat the question. I was thinking of something else to talk about.
You're trying to. I knew some Chris that said something like this.
Something.
No, but Jeff, that's a really good question. I'm thinking about that because I don't know that I have a really, really good answer. But I'll let you repeat the question while I'm thinking again.
I thought Paul was just daring me to repeat the question. My question is, in as much as we sometimes our industry, and we've talked about it other times, other shows, about how we kind of get sort of stuck on vulnerability discovery and doing all the vulnerability research. What if all the limited resources and all the smart people on the good side were focusing on ways to detect malicious activity, and not so much the vulnerability discovery, because if you haven't figured out yet, vulnerabilities I think are here to stay. But focus more on the detection and making sure that bad actors are being caught early when they're doing things. Would that not be a better use of our time and resources?
Well, I think inevitably you need to do both. And in order to be successful in defending architecture, you have to understand how people are attacking it. You have to understand where your potential weaknesses lie. So doing that vulnerability research and exploit research should get funneled back into defenses so that developers can understand, well, this is like some way that someone could attack this that's kind of new. I mean, we see this in web applications all the time. I'm astounded that all of the new attack vectors that happen in web application security, if we don't study the vulnerabilities and exploits, we don't adjust our processes to how we detect those vulnerabilities, how we build our defenses, how we write code in a software environment, how we write code that is more resilient.
I agree and disagree, because I think back to the early days when I first got started in this whole thing that today we call cybersecurity. We used to call it network security, and it wasn't so much about the applications and the data. It was more the transport mechanisms, and I wonder if we've sort of bought into a mentality, and it seems perfectly reasonable that we do both. But is there I keep coming back to this because we seem to be doing better, but then we wait a week or a month, and some major breach gets announced, and we find out, oh, we're not really doing that well. The collective we, and I am continuing to look for, are there other ways to approach this problem? Are there other ways to think through this thing? Are we missing something? Because we seem to keep the earlier discussion, social engineering, phishing attacks, that's been around for 25 years. It's not new, but it's grown as an industry in terms of teaching companies, and it's fun. I'm not denying that it's fun to do, and I don't discourage people from pursuing it. But in the midst of us having lots of fun doing these cool things, are we missing a larger point that could really be more helpful to companies? If Joff was online, he'd be saying something to me right now.
I see your point, Jeff, and I think that I agree with you, especially when it comes to the Internet of Things, right? And this is an area that I've researched extensively with vulnerabilities in embedded systems, and I did reach a point exactly what you're talking about. I reached a point where I'm like, wow, we're all doing research, or there's a lot of us doing research into how we can break into embedded systems and IoT devices. And I feel like we've reached a point a while ago where we're like, right, yeah, we can break this stuff. Okay, like enough. We don't need any more talks about how I can break into like consumer routers and Wi-Fi devices. Like we all know that there are issues. We can sit down like Daniel Messler, and put them into buckets and identify them, document them, and say we shouldn't do these things in these areas. OWASP has done a great job of doing that and categorizing attacks on the application side. So I think that's another great example, so that we can work towards building it into our processes so that we create software and products and services and protocols that are resilient to these attacks that we've discovered from vulnerability research and exploit research. But to Jeff's point, like there's a point where we don't need thousands of researchers all looking at the same problem and pointing out flaws. We need to document what they are, and some people still need to do that research, but we can probably move on to some other things, like how we do the defense. So in that sense, Jeff, I do agree.
I mean, it's kind of like, has anybody ever gotten a bug bounty for submitting the knowledge or the awareness of a default password or a default configuration? Because that's how the pen testers continually break in.
Well, I think it depends on the engagement for the bug bounty program.
It does, but also we have to define the different levels of authentication weakness, right? There's authentication bypass, there's the default credentials that may come with the device, and then there's the hard-coded credentials
Backdoor.
that are in there that aren't necessarily default. They're not. They're just kind of baked in. So you could change the default passwords, but what I would call the backdoor credentials are still valid on the system. In many embedded systems, you can't change that backdoor without upgrading the firmware and putting some new software
and I think it would also depend on the scope of the bug bounty program in place.
Yes, and in a bug bounty sense, they define the scope for bad, worse, or indifferent. They do define the scope, and that can certainly vary. Organizations, if Keith was here, like BugCrowd, could speak to probably how they coach their clients to probably a big phone call they have with every client, I would imagine, having spoken with BugCrowd. And no one officially has told me BugCrowd that this is how they do it, but I can imagine that when they sit down with a new client, one of the things they're helping them with is define the scope for their bug bounty. I mean, that has to be a huge part of their calls with their clients. And hopefully, organizations like BugCrowd are helping kind of raise the bar to set the appropriate level of scope for these bug bounties. And now, and to go back to your point too, all of the password issues that we talked about, if you have to pay out a bug bounty to discover those, like we just defined those for you on the show, right? Like there needs to be not a default password, there needs to be not backdoor credentials, and there needs to be something inside of your software that helps prevent people from setting a very weak password. You already know those three things. You don't get to pay anyone a bunch of money to tell you, I gave it out here for free on the show. Like those are things you should consider. There actually do exist standards and guidelines for many systems from OWASP and others that offer guidance and define what those things are.
But I will clarify, if you do wish to pay Paul money for that, he will gladly buy you a beer at a conference.
Absolutely.
And if you pay him lots of money, he'll buy the round
just
of beers
buy me
at the bar.
a beer at a conference, or just tell me thank you. That's fine.
Or
go for the beer ball. Come on.
Or a cigar.
Or not just say thank you. That's fine.
Perfect.
Anyway.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think that's really interesting on the vulnerability research side. Certainly, a lot of interesting theories there.
Well, and I hope I'm not offending anybody. I certainly value all the really smart people out there that are figuring out all this stuff. I think it's really cool that they figure out all this stuff. But I also wonder, I don't want to, I guess it's okay to piss off the bad guys. I don't think the bad guys are that smart. And they certainly don't take as much time, and part of it's because there's just easier pickings out there. So every time that we do something to improve, hopefully we are raising the bar, and someday all the companies out there that are lagging behind, that still get breached, will catch up. But I think that's a different nut to crack. So I'm not disparaging or discouraging anybody from doing security research. I just, I'm the old curmudgeon that wonders, is there a different thing we should be or could be doing?
Well, I think that's an interesting point, Jeff, because like, what is the body that's directing people as to what we should be researching? Who's directing those security researchers today? Is it the bug crowds? Is it the major software companies that are defining these bug bounties? Is it outside of bug bounties? Is it an organization like CERT or OWASP or whoever that's saying we really need people focused on this problem?
I don't think there is any one group that's defining what they need research on.
Maybe in different verticals, there.
Well,
I certainly you have to separate it out.
If there was, I'd love to hear what people want me to research.
Well,
because I'd go down that route. But for if you think about everything that we've ever done for that type of stuff, it's like, hey,
genuine curiosity.
What the heck is that?
How do I? I just bought this new thing and I'm relying on it for something that has some level of criticality in my life.
And I just got it, and I really should show that to Larry.
Yes, and let's go figure out like what the vulnerabilities are, and that's typically how it happens today, Jeff. So
yep. So a lot of direction. I'd say no.
I think there are specific industry verticals that either exist today or could be created to help steer things like medical devices. And so what should we be focusing on within medical devices? Sure, we could look at the firmware, and Billy Rios and many other researchers could tell us that it's a train wreck. We've established that. But like, what do we really need to research, and what information needs to come from that research to make the problem better in just that vertical? Up next, you're going to hear an interview from Dick Wilkins with talking about BIOS and platform firmware, more about platform firmware in UEFI. And they created a standards body to oversee the specification for UEFI, and he chairs the security committee that theoretically could drive like where they want people to research various aspects of the standard and then take it back to the council, which is made up of all, and Dick explains all the how it's structured, and set the direction for research. He describes a very much open community that works together for that. So we should encourage, and what I got from the interview is we should encourage that in other verticals and industries. And I think if you overlay what Jeff is saying, that we should provide some focus. So like today, there aren't thousands of researchers that are looking at consumer-based routers and just pointing out vulnerabilities. Like, yeah, we get it.
Yeah. Speaking of, maybe we'll segue into one of the last stories. I think we talk about who's doing some of this research and what some of the direction is. Looking at the story that I posted about some of the attacks against some of the Saudi petrochemical stuff that happened last August, which was actually kind of frightening. It happened to be against some very specific types of hardware that's in about 18,000 different petrochemical plants. The Schneider Electric Triconex quote safety systems in some industrial control type systems that were intended to prevent various things from going wrong, as in they were the safety controls to shut things off when things went bad, and based on what you could get for 40 grand, you could buy some of these systems off of eBay to do some analysis on, to develop some vulnerabilities, to interact with these systems, to potentially in a petrochemical plant turn off all of the safety controls. So when something went wrong, you'd either never know about it or the safety controls wouldn't engage and bad things would happen. The intent and the discoveries based on this particular attack against these Triconex systems was that should there have not been a small bug in the attacker's code, these safety controls would have failed and there would have been explosions and bad things and people would have been killed. Terrifying.
Interesting.
And it's allegedly a small bug. And they know about it now. They know what the bug is. And they've likely fixed it.
Hopefully.
I thought I had another article about something along those lines. Maybe not. Any other articles that anyone want to cover? Also, Patrick, while we're potentially thinking about that, did we say that you work for Rapid7 today?
I do, yes.
Correct? I don't know if we disclosed that before. I feel bad now waiting till the end. Rapid7 is a sponsor.
And it is in the show notes.
Of the Security Weekly Network. It is in the show notes. So, and so you're doing pen testing for Rapid7 today? Is that your full-time day job today?
Yeah, that's what I do every day. I get to...
Living the dream.
Yeah, every single day.
It's gone to the dark side, and we're not just talking about Rapid7. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No,
yeah, it's a whole lot of fun. Every single week, just kind of get a new target, and somebody says, here's this network, go at it, and at the end of the week, write a report and let us know what you found.
It's awesome.
It's fun stuff.
Nothing better.
Very cool. Well, with that, we'll take a short break and come back with our pre-recorded interview with Dick Wilkins from Phoenix Technologies. Do not miss this interview. It's awesome. Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame, automate the hunt. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for Teams by visiting itpro.tv/Security Weekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30. Hey everyone, I am very happy to introduce our guest for this interview segment today. Dick Wilkins is an associate professor of computer science at Thomas College in Central Maine and is a principal technology liaison for Phoenix Technologies. Some of our listeners may recognize that. If you booted a computer in the past 20 years, you may have recognized Phoenix Technologies come up on your screen. It's of course a USA-based system boot firmware development company. Dick is active in several international standards bodies and sits on the board for the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, or UEFI Forum. He's a leader in the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, or IEEE as we say. And in the Computer Society, he is active in the Association for Computing Machinery, or ACM, and the Project Management Institute, or PMI. He has over 30 years experience in the industry and has had several positions at some pretty big companies, including Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, and Amazon. Dick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Dick, my first question for you is, when we talk about UEFI, we've covered it on the show in the past in a security light, but what are some of the security implications, both threats and defensive implications for UEFI?
Well, as any platform firmware, it's an attack surface that the bad guys out there in the world might choose to go after. And so it needs to be protected and secure, just like any piece of software or firmware on your computer system. And UEFI is no different than any other piece of software, and it needs the same kinds of security mechanisms.
And so some people are kind of freaked out about UEFI, and I've noticed that in some of the articles that I've read, where people are just like, "Oh my God, what we used to call the BIOS is connected to the world, and this is just a complete disaster for security." Can you kind of dispel some of those myths for us?
UEFI was developed. It was originally EFI, the Extensible Firmware Interface, as a replacement for traditional BIOS. And we try not to call it BIOS anymore because the traditional BIOS doesn't really exist. For many years, the firmware has been largely replaced by one of various variants. And EFI is not some evil interface created to take over the world or something. You hear all kinds of conspiracy theories and that kind of thing, that the old Wintel consortium of Intel and Windows, Microsoft, created this thing in order to take over people's computers and somehow constrain them so they could only run what Intel and Windows wanted, essentially, or Intel and Microsoft wanted. None of that is true. The forum that maintains the specification is made up of over 300 companies, including some of those, but large companies, large and small, and many of them contribute to the standard and have developed a really high quality, secure environment to start your machine up and get the OS loaded.
Yeah, and one of the first things when I think about security in this context is Well, I relate to my own personal experience where I would upgrade hardware typically in older systems that would force me to update what was then the BIOS. And I used to have to get those, well, for me it was 3.5-inch floppies. I'm sure for some it was 5.25 or maybe even older. Those methods of updating, booting on a boot disk and manually updating that code that was running on the hardware that was responsible for identifying the other hardware on the system. But today, if we have a better way, an easier way to allow people to update this firmware, isn't that a good thing?
Oh, absolutely. As firmware has gotten more complex over the years, supported many more devices, created and the hackers, the bad guys of the world, have been thwarted in many cases by the OS vendors and application vendors from attacking those systems. They've looked for other venues, and if there are flaws in firmware, you need to be able to update it, just like you could update your application or install, operating system patches and those kinds of things. So you really need to be able to do that on a routine basis, just for, as you said, sometimes new hardware support, but it doesn't have to be that. I mean, it can be security flaws that exist, other enhancements, improvements, speed ups, whatever. You need to be able to do that. And the UEFI specification provides a mechanism for safely doing that and securely doing that. So only signed, cryptographically signed capsules containing firmware updates can be loaded into your system, and the process is specified such that you can't do things like roll back to a less secure version of the firmware.
Yeah, and I've always thought that along those lines, an interesting attack vector and something that I think people were concerned about, but I haven't seen really pervasive in the wild, is that some malicious actor is going to infect the firmware, and then regardless of what you do in your operating system, they're going to be able to reinfect your operating system. Is that something that you talk about a lot in the forum and work to protect? Because that could be a very stealthy way to persist on a system if you're a bad actor.
As I've written a number of times in various publications and white papers and talk about in speaking engagements, the firmware is a very potentially dangerous place, in that if you can somehow get control of what's going on with the firmware, you've got total control of the box at that point. You can load anything you want to, you can spoof anything you want to, you can hide from the OS the fact that it's booting potentially in a hypervisor created by the attacking firmware, and when it thinks it's in total control of the machine, it in fact is being spoofed. There's lots of attack vectors, and a number of them have been demonstrated. I think we in general are very lucky that the bad guys haven't really attacked too many systems out there in the world. There have been a number of cases where firmware has been attacked, and I guess the most pervasive versions that I've seen have been denial of service kinds of things, where they've attacked firmware and changed settings or caused it in such a way so the machine would no longer boot, and bricked or turned machines into boat anchors, as we like to say. Those have been not widespread, thank goodness, but they have happened, and we need to make sure that they don't happen in the future.
Yeah, certainly early malware back in the day, that was, they didn't overwrite the master boot record, for example, or even, corrupt back then was the BIOS. Today, especially as we, talk about embedded platforms, it's, of course, because you have that flash chip and you have control in a lot of platforms over what's on that flash chip. If you start overwriting things, you can override, that code that's actually initializing the hardware, in which case we basically brick ourselves. It's not an attacker, but on the embedded platform, I think a lot of times it happens because, people are messing around and overwrite things that they shouldn't. Have you, kind of experienced that in the embedded world?
It could happen on any machine. I don't want to focus on embedded in that particular case. I think the issue at this point for devices, particularly up and coming, the widespread and widely spreading IoT space, those devices haven't up to date focused as much on security as they probably should have. I don't want to go with too broad a brush here because some have been very good, but too many of them have left themselves wide open for the kinds of situations you were talking about, where firmware can be overwritten and software loaded that was unexpected and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I've often found, working with embedded systems that they kind of skip that step of validating the code that's running on the chip. Is that just because they have a small code base to work with? In other words, the bootloader in this case, or whatever the mechanism will just basically load whatever you give it because there's no checks and balances to say you have to be running signed code. Is that just because there's such a small space to work with?
Traditionally, they believed that because embedded developers have thought that, well, this is an embedded device that's encapsulated in the microwave oven or the washing machine or whatever, and it's not connected to the internet, and it's really hard to infect it, and it's a single purpose thing loading a really single purpose piece of code, and no one cares. I can just ship it and forget it. But nowadays, most everything's becoming internet connected, and that puts up the risk right there. Just like any PC or server in the world, if it's an internet-connected device, it can be hacked and used for nefarious purposes.
And so, embedded system, what's the adoption like for embedded systems using, or IoT devices using UEFI?
Very slow at this point. It's something that the UEFI forum would like to very much to expand our reach, and we're essentially doing a sales job at this point, trying to educate people who build embedded and IoT devices about the advantages of the UEFI approach to system startup. But most folks that are in that world today have come from the monolithic bootloader space, the U-boots and core boots of the world, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with those systems. I feel like UEFI, the UEFI approach has embedded security right into the design and architecture. It's not an add-on or a piece you get to choose to choose whether it's part of your architecture or not. You can choose whether it's part of your implementation, but it's right embedded into the standard architecture.
And what are some of those security enhancements that you would get on an embedded platform by using UEFI?
Well, the two big ones are the things we've kind of talked about or alluded to anyway. The first is the secure boot functionality. Secure boot gives you the capability of using a root of trust that starts right with the CPU hardware and microcode and progresses right through, potentially all the way through the operating system boot and the application starting up, that no piece of code will run on the computer unless it's been cryptographically signed and correctly matches the keys stored in the machine. And so if anything is either hacked, damaged, or replaced, it won't run. Now, that may cause the machine not to boot, but in my take, I would much rather have my machine fail to boot and realize, oh, gee, I need to upgrade the firmware or do some sort of remediation to get it back to a safe state, rather than booting up and me not realizing that it's been damaged in some way and it attacks my network or shares my personal information or something. So secure boot is part. Then the update process that we've talked about is another part that prevents installation of unsigned updates to the firmware, and also prevents rollbacks to previous versions that may be flawed security-wise. And I think thirdly, something UEFI doesn't talk about as widely because it really kind of crosses over from one organization to the other. the reference implementations of UEFI include the support for the Trusted Computing Group's TPM chip, which allows you to do measured boot, which is very similar to secure boot, except it allows the boot to go ahead and proceed potentially, but notes the fact that any particular piece of the system is not the same as what it was before. And if you use a system uses the NIST 800-155 guidelines for authenticated boot, it could notify a remediation server of the fact, gee, I booted up and got up successfully, but something was compromised in my boot process, and this system needs to be placed on a secure subnet and attached to a remediation server who can do repairs and get it back into a good state before it's allowed to run normal code and join the normal corporate network or government network or whatever. This is an area that I think is becoming more and more important.
You mentioned the UEFI forum previously. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of companies that are involved with that forum. What are some of the goals for that forum?
Well, the forum was formed initially when Intel, who had developed this new approach to booting up a system and the interface between the OS as it boots and the firmware on the platform, they came up with this thing called EFI. And it was leaps and bounds ahead of the old BIOS that had existed today. But the problem was, of course, it was owned by Intel. And there were those, and I think there's some reasonable fear out there in the industry that, gee, if a standard is completely owned by a major player with as much power as Intel, that maybe, you know, it might not be something that I want to take advantage of. And Intel saw this happening, and I'm speaking for them. Clearly, I don't work for Intel, and I never have. But I believe what happened really was that they decided that no one was going to adopt the EFI standard because it was owned by them. So they contributed essentially the specification to this organization called the UEFI Forum, and their implementations to open source, essentially, with the idea of creating a collaborative industry-wide body to maintain the standard going forward so that no particular company would own it, and everybody would have an opportunity to contribute and participate and guide how that standard moved forward. It is similar to an open source kind of thing, but it's for an architecture, for a standard.
Yeah, so Intel come up with the architecture or standard, and then the companies develop their own implementation, sort of like an RFC, correct?
Very much, yes. And this has been so successful. The companies get together on regular weekly meetings in work groups for different portions of the specification. Addition, you know, there's a security sub-team and the you know, platform initialization team, and that working on various aspects of the process and the specifications for those. And as I said, it's incredibly collaborative. I've been involved with standards bodies across the industry, and some of them can be quite combative and argumentative, and companies get mad and start blackballing each other, and bad things happen. I have not seen that in UEFI at all. Everybody works together, and if somebody's got a concern about a new proposal or an update or change, everybody steps back and forms an ad hoc team to go off and figure it out and comes to a consensus about how this should move forward. Things have been left out because they just didn't have broad acceptance, and others, the people's concerns have been addressed, and the standards changed. So it's an incredibly collaborative and terrific environment.
And so, given that a lot of companies have their own implementations, what are some of the really cool implementations that you've seen of UEFI?
That's a tough one, honestly. It's a good question, but I don't honestly have a terrific answer for that because a lot of times companies, the really cool implementations, they keep to themselves.
Yeah, that's true.
I know Apple is one of the early adopters and has been using EFI from before the UEFI forum existed, and they've been an active participant in the development over the years, and they use it in many of their products. But I don't know the details, and that's true of a lot of companies. They keep this very close to the vest, and I think the people may be surprised out there to realize that UEFI and the extensible firmware interface has actually been around and been on PC and laptop platforms and servers and Apple devices for many years. And there was always a BIOS compatibility mode that was available in that system. And so OEMs, the companies that build PCs, have for many years been using UEFI firmware, but in fact had a compatibility mode layer on top of it to make it look like it was still running the old BIOS. So people say, well, this is something really new or something that only came out after Windows 8 and Microsoft started mandating the secure boot capability. Most computers, PC, laptops, tablets, and many servers and that kind of thing have been running UEFI firmware for years before that.
So what's next for you, EFI?
I think it's going to continue to evolve. In the last couple of years, the creators of the ACPI specification, the Advanced Control and Power Interface, I believe is what the TLA or the acronym stands for. That specification was owned by several significant industry players, about 8 of them, I believe, and they absolutely controlled that interface. Then that's the interface that for power control between the OS and platform firmware. And as I said, that was completely owned by a handful of companies. That handful of companies decided that the collaborative approach taken by UEFI was such a great environment for maintaining a specification that group voted among itself to go ahead and hand over the specification to the UEFI organization. And now ACPI specification is maintained by the UEFI organization. And the big move, I think, more than anything else, is to increase the bindings for both UEFI and ACPI and the various specifications that make that up to more and more platforms. A major effort has been done to broaden it to all the ARM platforms, and ARM Holdings and the various chip vendors and all have been active participants in that process. And as other processors become prevalent in the industry, bindings will be available for those, and implementations will enter the open source space of UEFI type firmware for those other processor types.
And so, we've seen the progression from BIOS to UEFI. Like, is there something that's next that's going to replace UEFI, or it kind of sounds like it's just going to continue to expand?
I think it's going to evolve and just continue to be extensible. I think that most likely, I hadn't really considered this until we started preparing for this call, but the thing that struck me is I think maybe an effort to pull out from the various specifications old latent material that was in the specifications in order to support legacy platforms that probably don't exist and are not needed anymore. So that might be my proposal to the organization, really, is to start thinking about a simplified or stripped out version, particularly targeting new emerging technology platforms.
That's awesome. So does if I have a regular conference, you only have regular calls, but you also have regular conferences? Is that true?
We don't have conferences in the traditional sense, although we have been for a number of years, but having what's referred to as what we've called plug fests. And the idea of those initially was to get all the OEMs, the chip vendors, the hardware vendors that had plug-in cards, all that, all together in one place at one time, and have everybody plug their hardware together and make sure it actually worked and debug it. Gave an opportunity for lots of companies to rapidly test their new hardware to see if it met the standard and just worked with all the other devices. We've been doing those for a number of years, usually 2, 3, or 4 a year, depending on how active the market is with new devices and new software. Over time, those have been become more and more training opportunities where we bring together a lot of the engineers, the technical folks in the various companies, bring them all together in one place and talk about what's happening in the standard, new devices, new technologies, and educate people on what they need to be paying attention to as the world goes on. So they're becoming more and more of a training opportunity and less of actually plugging hardware together and seeing if it works.
That actually sounds like a lot of nerdy fun.
It is. We're having one the end of this month, and it's a members-only operation. You have to be at least an adopter member of the UEFI forum, but it's a lot of fun, and it's taking place in Seattle, right down the street from Microsoft. So they sent a lot of interesting folks from the Microsoft campus right to our affair, and then get to meet and talk with those folks.
And now, Dick, you recently wrote an article for an embedded computing magazine. I believe we have the link, and we'll put that in the show notes. But do you want to just tell our audience a little bit about that article if they want to check it out?
Yeah, it was a fairly high-level piece with the intent of just letting folks know that are coming out of the embedded space and starting to do development of IoT-type devices that it's important. The platform firmware really is important, and you need to consider the security angle of it, and that if you haven't been attacked yet in this space, you probably will be, and maybe you should consider an implementation of UEFI. I know there are a lot of folks from that space that are very comfortable doing development on top of U-boot or Core Boot or one of the various other open source versions, and that's perfectly fine. And many of them have capabilities similar to Secure Boot and the Secure Update facilities in the UEFI that are available, you can put together, and there's absolutely no reason not to. The advantage, I think, for a UEFI is there's, it's part of the specification. It's been well tested, and as I said in the article, while we have seen an occasional flaw in specific implementations where somebody made a coding error, no one yet, including a lot of really sophisticated security researchers and academics, have spent a lot of time looking at the code and probing the software, and no one has yet found an architectural flaw. I'm not going to say there aren't any.
Right.
A negative like that, but no one's found one yet, and that's great. And I can say that fairly definitively because I chair the UEFI's security response team that responds to any reports of security flaws or problems in anybody's product that is using UEFI firmware.
That's awesome. Anything else you want to share with our audience?
I'm just trying to think here. So UEFI is a solid, publicly available, open source. The implementations are open source. The specification is open to anybody. Anybody can join the forum and adopt the technology at no cost. And if you choose to be a participant in developing the specifications, it's a for a company, it's a trivial cost to join, just to maintain the membership organization, the infrastructure necessary, websites, and those kinds of things. So it's a trivial cost to participate. Everyone's welcome, and we would love to have even more companies involved and add value. I think it's a flexible, modular approach to platform firmware, and it really is the wave of the future, I believe. And it's my hope that other than some very specific cases where monolithic, simple, straightforward boot solutions make more sense, in most all cases, the UEFI approach is more flexible and allows for extensibility and support of complex and simple platforms.
It's awesome. Dick Wilkins from Phoenix Technologies, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Happy to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.